Paul Heyman always wins. At least, that's what everyone believed, until now. Last night, the unthinkable happened. Seth Rollins, standing tall with the black crown, had CM Punk exactly where he wanted him, broken, cornered, alone. But then, the arena went black. And when the lights came back on, it wasn't Punk standing alone anymore. It was him. Roman Reigns didn't come back to reclaim his title. He didn't come back to save face. He came back to declare war on the man who betrayed him, and the mastermind who orchestrated it all, Paul Heyman. If you thought the Bloodline was dead, think again. This isn't about redemption. This is revenge. What happens when the kingmaker becomes the hunted? For over a decade, Paul Heyman was untouchable. The genius behind the scenes, the brain behind Brock Lesnar, the voice of Roman Reigns, the architect of dominance. In the world of professional wrestling, Heyman was more than a manager. He was a movement. His name didn't just command respect, it demanded fear. But last night, that all changed. For the first time in years, Paul Heyman didn't look like the man pulling the strings. He looked like the target. It happened fast, but not without warning. CM Punk, bloodied and barely able to stand, had taken just about all Seth Rollins had to offer. The arena lights buzzed overhead as Rollins stood in the corner, clutching the newly christened black crown, his twisted version of power, glory, and control. Punk had asked for a fight. What he got was a message: you don't belong here anymore. The crowd wasn't cheering. They weren't booing. They were silent, watching the end of a legend. Then, blackout. Not a flicker. Not a flicker of pyro, not a glitch in the light grid. Total darkness. In wrestling, that usually means one thing: a return. A debut. A twist. But this wasn't just anyone returning. This was him. The return that nobody saw coming. When the lights snapped back on, everything was different. Seth Rollins had backed toward the ropes, his smirk faltering. CM Punk was still down, gasping for air. But someone else stood in the ring. Unannounced. Uninvited. Unshaken. Roman Reigns. Hair damp, face stoic, hoodie zipped up like he was stepping out of the shadows of the past. Not the roaring tribal chief. Not the head of the table tyrant. Something quieter. Deadlier. There was no pyro. No entrance music. No Usos flanking him. Just the silence of realization, followed by a rising tidal wave of disbelief from 20,000 fans who couldn't believe what they were seeing. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He looked at Punk, then past him, straight at Seth. And then, Roman moved. It wasn't a brawl. Not yet. It was something far more unnerving. Reigns didn't lay a hand on Rollins. Instead, he walked past him. Calm. Calculated. He knelt beside CM Punk. The same Punk who once called him overrated. The same Punk who had mocked the Bloodline. The same Punk who, by all logic, should have been a sworn enemy. Reigns helped him up. Punk stared at him, dazed but wide-eyed, as if trying to understand what world he'd just entered. There was no handshake. No nod. Just a mutual understanding. A war was about to begin, and sides had already been chosen. Rollins stood frozen in the ring, clutching his crown like a lifeline. That night, the power structure of WWE cracked in half. Roman Reigns didn't return for glory. He didn't want the undisputed Universal Championship back. He didn't interrupt to reclaim a throne. This wasn't a redemption arc. It was a declaration. A warning. He was here for Paul Heyman. The man who made him. The man who broke him. The man who, when Roman needed him most, stood beside someone else. Seth Rollins. You see, in Roman's eyes, Heyman didn't just betray him. He reprogrammed the entire system. He built Rollins into a replacement. He helped script Roman out of his own dynasty. And now, Roman's back to erase the script and the scribe. Let's talk about CM Punk for a moment. The man's been a lone wolf his entire career. He doesn't trust stables. Doesn't bow to authority. Doesn't ally with anyone he can't bury if necessary. So why stand beside REIGNS? Why let the very embodiment of everything he once hated pull him off the mat? Because something bigger is happening. Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman didn't just isolate two of WWE's most dangerous minds, they weaponized them. They pushed them to the edges of relevance. They erased them from the script. They mocked their returns. They cast them as relics. And last night, the relics pushed back. REIGNS and Punk may not be friends. They may never trust each other. But they understand this: the enemy of my enemy might just be my most valuable ally. When Roman Reigns disappeared from WWE, fans thought the Bloodline era had ended. Titles were lost. Jay walked out. Jimmy floundered. Solo started taking orders from Heyman. The empire cracked under its own weight. But what no one expected was that Roman wasn't retreating. He was watching. He was waiting. And now, he's back, not to revive the Bloodline, but to dismantle what replaced it. To destroy Heyman's new order. To bring down Seth Rollins. And maybe, just maybe, to burn the entire system to the ground, starting with the man who lit the match. This isn't about heel turns or face pops. This is deeper. This is personal. Reigns returning doesn't just shift storylines, it rewrites them. Think about what this means. The company's most dominant champion and its most polarizing anti-hero now share a common goal: revenge. And Paul Heyman, the man who once controlled every piece on the board, just became the hunted. Seth Rollins? He's no longer the king. He's the target. The black crown means nothing if everyone around you is sharpening their knives. And CM Punk? He just went from loner to cornerstone in a war that could change the entire company. So, if you thought WWE had run out of surprises, you were wrong. Very wrong. Seth Rollins didn't ask for power. He took it. In the aftermath of Roman Reigns' long reign at the top, when the WWE landscape looked like a field littered with broken alliances and failed revolutions, there was one man who thrived in the rubble. One man who didn't just survive the chaos but mastered it. Seth Rollins didn't need the Bloodline. He didn't need Paul Heyman, not at first. He needed only himself, a microphone, and a grudge. But power has a price. And Seth paid it willingly. When Roman Reigns vanished from television, many assumed a vacuum had opened. Who would become the face of the company? Who could carry the weight of storytelling, merchandise, and locker room credibility all at once? The company needed someone who could connect with the audience while staying unpredictable, someone who could work heel or face without explanation. Seth Rollins stepped into that void, and never looked back. His early promos hinted at a shift. Less messiah, more monarch. He traded his religious metaphors for imperial language. No longer the visionary. Now the ruler. The suits got darker, the music grander. The laughter more restrained. And then came the black crown. Not a sanctioned title. Not a belt defended in any official sense. The black crown wasn't awarded by WWE management, it was created by Seth himself. Forged in symbolism and elevated through spectacle. A crown of jagged onyx, presented during a live episode of Raw like a coronation in a Shakespearean tragedy. He didn't declare himself champion. He declared himself king. The black crown became a metaphor for his control over the WWE narrative. Not just wins and losses, but moments, influence, and relevance. Rollins was done chasing titles. He wanted something bigger, myth. This was Seth's reign, not in gold, but in aura. And for a time, it worked. Spectacularly. The fans, whether they loved him or hated him, showed up. Week after week. Ratings spiked. Merchandise with the Black Crown insignia sold out. His matches with Drew McIntyre, Cody Rhodes, even Gunther, were headliners. Not because they were for a title, but because they mattered. He mattered. But behind every rise is the seed of its fall. As Rollins grew in prominence, his relationship with Paul Heyman began to mutate. At first, it was subtle. A knowing glance backstage. A compliment on commentary. Then, meetings. Strategy sessions. And eventually, something darker. Sources backstage whispered that Heyman had found his new project. That with Roman gone, he was searching for a successor. Not just a champion, but a legacy. Seth, for all his eccentricities, was perfect. He had Roman's work rate, Punk's mic skills, and none of the baggage. To Heyman, Seth wasn't just a star, he was controllable. Rollins, for his part, welcomed it. At least publicly. Privately, though, there were signs he knew exactly what he was becoming. Not a monarch, but a puppet wearing a crown. The Black Crown began to weigh heavier. His laughter started to feel hollow. His attacks on CM Punk grew more vicious, less strategic. There was a rage under the surface, one born not of dominance, but insecurity. He wasn't Roman. He wasn't Brock. He wasn't even Punk. He was Seth Rollins, living under the illusion of control, while Heyman pulled the strings just out of frame. This came to a head in the weeks leading to the confrontation. CM Punk, recently returned, had mocked the Black Crown in a promo that nearly broke the internet. "You made your own crown because no one gave you the real one," he sneered. The crowd exploded. Rollins didn't respond that night. The next week, he jumped Punk backstage. It wasn't just an attack, it was a message. No more jokes. No more meta commentary. This was about legacy. Rollins had built an empire of influence. Punk threatened to tear it down with a sentence. And Heyman? Silent. Watching. Some say this was the moment Rollins began to realize he was being used. Others believe it was always part of the plan. The Black Crown gave Rollins the freedom to pretend he was in charge, while Heyman orchestrated a deeper strategy, one that had nothing to do with Seth's future, and everything to do with Roman's past. Rollins went harder. Dirtier. More paranoid. He started cutting promos that didn't sound like him. That's because they weren't him. They were Heyman's words. He mocked the tribal chief. He ridiculed the Bloodline. He said Roman wasn't returning because he had nothing left to offer. That his time was over. Fans started to question it. Not because Rollins was wrong, but because he was too loud about it. Too eager to erase the shadow Roman still cast over the company. That's when the wheels began to turn. Rollins was winning on TV, but losing in perception. Fans didn't chant his name. They waited to see who might challenge it. Enter CM Punk. Punk wasn't the answer. He was the catalyst. The symbol of everything Seth feared, being forgotten. Rollins' attacks grew personal. Not just physical beatdowns but verbal assaults that reached into Punk's real-life history. His injuries. His lawsuits. His supposed failures in other promotions. Nothing was off-limits. And Heyman? He stood behind the curtain, watching both men destroy each other. That's how he's always done it. Let the wolves fight, then tame the survivor. Rollins, in his hunger to be immortal, became Heyman's chess piece. The Black Crown was never his. It was bait. A shiny distraction to make him feel powerful while he dug his own grave. When the night of reckoning came, when Rollins stood over Punk, ready to cement his reign, it wasn't a victory. It was an execution. Until the lights went out. Roman Reigns had seen enough. He didn't need to speak. His presence said it all. The Black Crown? False. The King? Exposed. And Heyman? Nowhere to be found. Rollins stared across the ring and saw not just a man from his past, but the embodiment of everything he tried to replace. Roman didn't need a title. He didn't need approval. He had timing. And vengeance. And as he helped Punk up, Rollins realized something no crown could protect him from. He was never the ruler. He was the replacement. And now, the original was back, with a debt to collect. CM Punk wasn't supposed to come back. Not after the lawsuits. Not after the podcast fallout. Not after the chants turned from longing to mockery. Wrestling fans are passionate, but they rarely forgive as loudly as they hate. And for nearly a decade, CM Punk represented both the myth of independence and the consequence of walking away. But when he returned, it wasn't nostalgic. It was nuclear. His music hit and the arena cracked open like a fault line. Some cheered. Some booed. Everyone watched. That's the thing about Punk. He doesn't need to be liked. He needs to be seen. Punk walked out that night with a swagger that wasn't cocky, it was surgical. He knew exactly what he was doing, and exactly where the knives were hidden. He didn't need a storyline. He was the storyline. No elaborate build-up. No cryptic teasers. Just a return that demanded the spotlight because it was real. And that's what separates Punk from everyone else, authenticity. You never know if he's cutting a promo or cracking open his chest to pour his real emotions into the ring. Every word he speaks feels like the edge of a confession or the start of a revolution. He came back to a WWE that had changed, new stars, new alliances, new power structures. But he hadn't changed. Not really. Still opinionated. Still volatile. Still magnetic. His very presence reminded the audience that wrestling doesn't need to be polished to be powerful. It needs friction. Tension. Discomfort. The first few weeks were electric. He didn't jump into a feud. He circled. He observed. And then he found his target. Seth Rollins. It made perfect sense. Rollins was the anti-Punk. A corporate favorite with the illusion of rebellion. A man who draped himself in chaos but played by the rules just enough to keep his seat at the table. To Punk, Rollins wasn't a villain, he was a fraud. The confrontation wasn't explosive. It was surgical. One night, Punk picked up a mic and dismantled Rollins in under 5 minutes. "You crowned yourself king," he said, "because no one else would." The crowd lost it. Rollins didn't respond, not then. And that silence? It wasn't strength. It was shock. Punk had drawn blood without throwing a punch. Behind the scenes, people wondered, would this work? Could Punk really hang in the WWE machine again? Was he too fragile? Too outspoken? Too unpredictable? But that's the wrong question. Punk wasn't trying to fit back into the system. He was trying to crash it. And Rollins? He was the first wall. The feud began to accelerate. Tension in promos. Interference in matches. Twitter jabs. The animosity felt organic because it was. These two had never liked each other. Their philosophies clashed. Their histories clashed. Even their fanbases clashed. This wasn't sports entertainment. This was personal. And in the middle of it all, Paul Heyman stood silent. That silence meant more than words. Heyman had once backed Punk during his infamous title run. He had stood in his corner during some of the most chaotic moments of Punk's career. But this time, he said nothing. Because he had Rollins. And whether or not Heyman saw it coming, that non-intervention was all Punk needed to declare war, not just on Seth, but on the system that abandoned him. But Punk was fighting with a limp, literally and metaphorically. He wasn't the same physically. He was slower. Less agile. He grunted more with each bump. The younger guys moved around him like lightning while he stuck to ground and pound tactics. But he didn't need to fly. He needed to hurt. His matches weren't five-star classics. They were statements. He targeted limbs. He brawled. He fought like a man with a clock ticking behind his ribs. And yet, there was always the looming question, how long could he last? Rollins seemed poised to answer it. He called Punk a relic, a busted myth, a virus from a dead era. He mocked his failures outside the company. Called him a coward. A quitter. And week after week, Rollins gained the upper hand. He beat Punk in backstage ambushes, tag matches, even verbally in interviews. But here's the thing about Punk. He doesn't need momentum. He needs a moment. And that moment was coming. Because just when Punk seemed cornered. When Rollins had him isolated, when Heyman had effectively erased him from the title conversation, something shifted. The crowd. They didn't chant Rollins' name anymore. They started chanting Punk's. Not because he was winning. But because he kept standing back up. He kept getting in the ring. He kept showing up. Fans saw themselves in Punk's bruises. In his stubbornness. In his refusal to be quiet. He wasn't supposed to survive in this environment. But here he was, taking the beatings and throwing middle fingers at the machine that tried to silence him. And then the final beatdown happened. Rollins cornered him in the main event. No disqualifications. No rules. Just a pure, vicious dismantling. He stomped him on the steps. Wrapped a chair around his neck. Lifted the black crown above his body. The arena didn't boo. They watched. Because something was off. The violence didn't feel like victory. It felt like a distraction. And then? Darkness. The lights went out. The silence returned. And when they came back on, Punk wasn't alone anymore. Roman Reigns stood beside him. Not smiling. Not posing. Just standing. And Punk? For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the voice of the voiceless. He was the center of a storm. The second coming wasn't about proving he still had it. It was about reminding the world why they needed him in the first place. It was supposed to be a crowning moment. The end of a rivalry, the solidification of a legacy, and the continuation of Seth Rollins' reign. Instead, it became the night everything unraveled. The card was stacked. Rollins versus Punk in a no-holds-barred match, no title on the line, but something much more valuable, control. Control of the narrative. Of the locker room. Of legacy. The stakes were invisible, but every fan could feel them. You don't book two icons against each other unless you're writing history. Rollins entered first, dressed in black and gold, the black crown perched on a velvet cushion, carried by two masked attendants. He wasn't just portraying power, he was embodying it. Confident, sneering, soaking in the heat from the crowd, Rollins didn't just want to win. He wanted to erase CM Punk from the company. He wanted this night to be remembered as the final page in the Punk chapter. Punk entered with far less pageantry. Hoodie up. Jaw clenched. No music. Just raw, uncut emotion. He looked like a man walking into a gunfight with a knife, and he knew it. But that's what Punk does. He walks into fights he shouldn't win. Because every time you say he can't, he shows you he will. Or he'll die trying. The bell rang. And for nearly 30 minutes, they tore each other apart. It wasn't a match. It was a message written in bruises and broken steel. Rollins targeted Punk's back with surgical precision. Steel chair shots. Repeated throws into the barricade. He wrapped Punk's body in kendo sticks like he was trying to tie him into a cautionary tale. Punk bled early. Not just a cut, an open stream down the temple. He looked out of it. But he kept crawling back. At one point, Rollins shouted into the camera, "This is what happens when you chase ghosts." The camera panned to Heyman at ringside. Stoic. Cold. almost detached. That was the first sign. Something felt off. Heyman wasn't directing traffic. He wasn't shouting strategy. He was watching. Waiting. As the match wore on, Punk began to slow. The crowd, once hot, became anxious. They'd seen this story before. Punk returning, only to be humiliated, discarded, replaced. Rollins stood in the corner, holding the black crown above his head, mocking Punk's struggle to get up. And that's when it happened. The lights didn't flicker. They died. Complete blackout. The arena exploded, not in sound, but anticipation. It wasn't a production botch. This was a message. And everyone knew what it meant. Someone was coming. The lights stayed off for nearly 15 seconds. An eternity in a live broadcast. Enough time for millions to sit forward on their couches, hearts racing. Then, floodlights. Not the usual spotlights. Floodlights from the ground up. Cold white beams that cast long shadows. In the ring, Rollins turned around. And saw him. Roman Reigns. No music. No tribal necklace. No bloodline insignia. Just a hoodie. A grim expression. And a purpose. The reaction in the arena was volcanic. Grown men screamed. Teens stood on their chairs. Commentators went silent, intentionally. The silence told the story better than any line could. Reigns stepped into the ring, not like a man returning, but like one reclaiming. He looked down at Punk. And then directly at Seth. Rollins didn't speak. He didn't move. And Reigns? He knelt beside Punk and offered his hand. That's when the spell broke. Rollins lunged, but Punk caught him mid-step with a low blow, desperation turning into survival. Rollins dropped. Reigns stood tall again, looming. Then he spoke. 5 words. You chose the wrong side. The crowd lost it. Reigns grabbed Rollins by the throat, lifted him like a rag doll, and hit him with a thunderous spear that shook the ring. Punk, still barely standing, dragged himself upright with the ropes. He and Reigns shared a look. Not brotherhood. Not respect. Something else. Recognition. They were both weapons. And now they were pointed at the same target. Rollins rolled out of the ring, clutching his ribs. The black crown lay in the center of the ring, unattended, unwanted. Paul Heyman? Gone. Vanished during the blackout. The image that closed the show wasn't of a champion holding gold. It was of Reigns and Punk standing in the ring, bruised and unsmiling, as the arena drowned in disbelief. This wasn't a return. It was an opening shot. A declaration of war. In the days that followed, everything changed. Social media exploded. Theories popped up like wildfire. Was Reigns aligned with Punk? Or was this just a shared enemy? Had Heyman orchestrated all of this? Where were the Usos? Where was Solo? WWE had spent years building an empire with Roman Reigns at its head. Now, that empire was broken. And Reigns wasn't coming back to fix it. He was coming back to bury it. Paul Heyman has never thrown a punch in a WWE ring, but he's done more damage than most men with steel chairs and steel minds. He's been the voice behind icons, the mind behind moments, the manipulator behind legends. He's not a manager, he's an institution. A shadow behind the throne. And yet, last night, he disappeared. Vanished. No interference. No last-minute save. Not a word of protest when Roman Reigns, his former tribal chief, returned unannounced. No grimace, no deflection, no attempt to spin the narrative. Just silence. That silence? It was deafening. Because Heyman never stays quiet unless the script is falling apart. To understand what that moment really meant, you have to understand Paul Heyman's history, not as a character, but as a force. He's not just someone who attaches himself to power. He creates it, crafts it, controls it. And when it no longer serves him, he abandons it. He did it with Brock Lesnar. He did it with CM Punk. And now, it appears he's done it again, with Seth Rollins. But this time? The pieces are moving without him. Heyman's power has always come from proximity. He's the man who doesn't just whisper in the ear of kings, he writes the coronation speech. His success lies in timing, manipulation, and planting the right seed at the right time. He doesn't need to win matches. He wins influence. With Roman Reigns, Heyman hit the peak of his career. He helped mold Reigns into the most dominant force the company had seen in years. Not just a champion, a symbol. The tribal chief gimmick wasn't just a storyline. It was a movement. Merchandise. Mythology. Messaging. All of it filtered through Heyman's mind. But power is unstable when shared. The cracks began when Roman started trusting his instincts over Heyman's strategies. When he began questioning motives. When he noticed Heyman's praise for others, especially for Seth Rollins. Rollins had always been a project to Heyman. An ideal hybrid of charisma and chaos. The man who could be molded into anything, as long as he felt like he was the one making the choices. But Reigns knew better. He saw the patterns. Heyman doesn't manage wrestlers. He cultivates weapons. And when one weapon dulls, or questions him, he looks for another blade. That's exactly what happened. As Roman began pulling away, Heyman quietly shifted his allegiance. He didn't turn on Reigns publicly. He didn't need to. He just started whispering to Rollins louder. Helping him shape promos. Feeding him lines. Coordinating backstage appearances. Crafting the myth of the Black Crown. The message was subtle but clear. Roman had power. But Seth had presence. And presence, in a company built on moments, sells. But in Heyman's effort to build a new dynasty, he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated the depth of Roman Reigns' resentment. Reigns disappeared not because he was defeated, but because he was calculating. He watched as Heyman shifted alliances. He watched as the Black Crown narrative grew. He watched Seth declare himself the new face of dominance. And Heyman? He was too busy pulling strings to see the noose tightening around his own influence. By aligning with Rollins and ignoring Punk, Heyman drew a line in the sand. A dangerous one. Because Punk never forgets betrayal. And Reigns never forgives it. It was the perfect storm, and Heyman built it himself. Now, here's the deeper twist. Heyman's silence after Roman's return wasn't fear. It was recognition. He saw it. Felt it. The empire he built had outgrown his control. Rollins was no longer following orders. He believed his own mythology. The Black Crown had gone from being a tool to a symbol of ego. And Punk? He wasn't playing a role. He was acting out of genuine fury, real pain, and a hunger to destroy everything that cast him out. For the first time in decades, Heyman wasn't managing the story. He was part of someone else's. That realization is devastating for a man like Paul Heyman. Because his identity has always been tied to control. Without it, he's just another man in a suit with history but no leverage. The backstage speculation after the event was rampant. Some said Heyman was in shock. Others claimed he left the building minutes before Reigns speared Rollins. A few believe he's planning something far worse, an alliance none of us see coming. But for now, he's silent. No tweet. No promo. No interview. Just absence. And in WWE, absence doesn't mean weakness. It means he's planning. The question is, planning for who? Is he going to try and win back Roman's favor? Does he abandon both and find a new chosen one, Solo Sikoa, perhaps? Or does he return with a counterstrike so devastating it repositions him above them all? Make no mistake, Paul Heyman always plays the long game. But this time, the game might have outgrown him. Because if Roman Reigns and CM Punk are truly aligned, if they'd both committed to burning down the empire Heyman built, then the puppet master may soon find his strings snapped, and his legacy hanging by a thread. And if that happens? There may be no one left to save him. Roman Reigns didn't leave the company. He was pushed out. Not officially. Not by storyline suspension or public scandal. It happened the way real betrayal always happens, quietly, in pieces. It starts with silence. Then exclusion. Then whispers. Until one day you look around and realize the people you trusted have moved on without you. That's what happened to the tribal chief. At the height of his dominance, Reigns ruled with a calm brutality. His word was gospel. His presence, undeniable. Wrestlers didn't just challenge him, they feared him. His promos weren't just lines, they were decrees. And the Bloodline? That wasn't just a faction. It was his legacy, living and breathing through the bodies of his cousins and the mind of Paul Heyman. Then it started to unravel. The first fracture came from within, Jey Uso. The emotional center of the Bloodline. The man who bent the knee, then stood tall, then broke away. His story arc wasn't just compelling, it was prophetic. Because once Jey walked out, the message was clear: this empire has cracks. Reigns didn't react with violence. He responded with coldness. The second fracture followed fast, Jimmy. Torn between loyalty and identity, he made his choice. He stayed, but half-hearted. His eyes always scanning for an exit. And then came Solo. The silent enforcer. The muscle behind the movement. Brought in to stabilize the Bloodline. But in Roman's absence, Solo began taking cues from someone else. Paul Heyman. Reigns trusted Heyman like a second brain. For years, he operated on Heyman's instincts. Strategy, psychology, manipulation, Heyman was his war room in a human body. But Solo's growing dependence on Heyman signaled something darker. Reigns wasn't in charge anymore. At least not fully. And Heyman didn't stop it. In fact, he fed it. Under Reigns, Solo was a weapon. Under Heyman, Solo became a blueprint for the future. Quiet. Powerful. Loyal. Controllable. That was Heyman's endgame. Not to destroy Roman, but to replace him. Reigns started seeing it. Small things. Changed scripts. Promos that didn't fit. Storylines that steered attention away from him. Rest periods that weren't his idea. He was being edited out. And while the cameras didn't show it, the locker room knew. You could see it in the way young talent stopped name-dropping Roman in interviews. How the production truck stopped using the head of the table branding as often. How commentary shifted focus toward Rollins, Rhodes, and Gunther. Reigns hadn't fallen from power. He was being ghosted by it. So he stepped away. Publicly, it was a break. Privately, it was exile. And Paul Heyman? He didn't check in. Not once. That's when the betrayal became real. Roman didn't just lose a title or a faction. He lost the man who swore loyalty with every breath. The man who, night after night, held the microphone while Roman tore opponents apart. The man who had once called him the greatest champion of our time. And now? He was standing beside Seth Rollins. Smiling. Advising. Whispering. Helping Seth become the face of the company that Roman built. To Reigns, it was unforgivable. Because loyalty wasn't about convenience. It was about sacrifice. Roman sacrificed everything to make the Bloodline what it was. He changed his style, his tone, his body, his reputation. He blurred the lines between fiction and reality so fully that even fans couldn't tell where Joe Anoa'i ended and Roman Reigns began. And Heyman let it all slip away like it didn't matter. That's why Roman didn't come back with fireworks. That's why there was no triumphant theme song. That's why he stood beside CM Punk, the man who once mocked everything the Bloodline stood for. Because Reigns wasn't coming back to reclaim his seat. He was coming back to burn the table. To destroy the system that replaced him. To punish the men who carried his crown like a toy. And most of all, to look Paul Heyman in the eye and remind him that kings don't get replaced. They return. And when they do, they don't ask for what's theirs. They take it. On paper, it doesn't make sense. Roman Reigns, the cold, calculated tribal chief. A man who thrived on loyalty, tradition, and control. A figure who spent years mocking outsiders and enforcing discipline. Standing beside CM Punk. The most vocal anti-establishment figure wrestling has ever known. A man who walked out on WWE, who burned bridges in every direction, and who built his legacy not on unity, but on rebellion. Why would Reigns choose him? The answer is simple. Because no one else was left. When Reigns vanished, no one fought for his return. The Usos imploded. Solo aligned with Heyman. Rollins took the spotlight. The company moved on. Fast. Reigns watched as the men he bled for turned their backs or kept their mouths shut. That silence wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment. But Punk stood alone too. Punk returned and got the same treatment, corporate applause, but locker room skepticism. He was welcomed back with smiles on screen, but hesitations behind the curtain. Management marketed him. Colleagues avoided him. He was a virus, too unpredictable, too opinionated, too dangerous to the ecosystem. Reigns recognized it instantly. Because he'd lived it. They're not alike in style. Not in philosophy. But in isolation? In how the system used them, then discarded them? They're twins. Both were once cornerstones. Both were once the future. And both were left behind the moment they became inconvenient. That's why Reigns didn't help Punk to prove a point. He helped him because he saw himself. Let's look closer. CM Punk represents resistance. Reigns represents dominance. One climbs over walls. The other builds them. One speaks truth to power. The other is power. But they've both been redefined by Paul Heyman, and rejected by him. Heyman stood with Punk during the legendary 434-day title reign. He helped build the cult of personality. Gave him a mouthpiece that echoed far beyond promos. But when that partnership broke down, Heyman walked away. Then he did it again with Reigns. It's not a coincidence. Punk and Reigns are two sides of the same weapon. Heyman used them. Now they're using each other. But this isn't friendship. There's no handshake, no shared hotel rooms, no let's grab drinks after Raw energy between these two. What exists between them is transactional. Tactical. Purposeful. Punk needs protection. Reigns needs a platform. Together, they get both. In aligning, they become something the company hasn't seen in years, two main eventers operating completely outside the existing structure. No brand loyalty. No management approval. No corporate direction. Just rage. Precision. And one shared goal, destroy the man who erased them. Seth Rollins is the face of the machine. Heyman is its heart. And the machine left them both behind. Now they're back to dismantle it. The fans caught on quickly. They didn't chant "Welcome back, Roman." They chanted "Holy smoke" when he stood beside Punk. Because even they knew, this was more than nostalgia. This was war. And when war comes, you don't care who your ally used to be. You care if he'll kill for you. Punk will. Reigns already has. Together, they don't represent the past. They represent revenge. Once upon a time, the Bloodline was the most powerful force in professional wrestling. Not just a stable. Not just a storyline. It was an institution. Built around heritage, family, fear, and dominance, the bloodline wasn't created overnight. It was forged over years of tension, redemption, and unrelenting control by one man, Roman Reigns. Flanked by the Usos and later Solo Sikoa, backed by the ever-strategic Paul Heyman, the faction ran WWE with a stranglehold few had ever seen before. Every title match was a sermon. Every segment, a declaration. Opponents didn't just face the bloodline, they were swallowed by it. But power that absolute never lasts. It started with hesitation. Jey Uso was always the emotional compass of the group. He wasn't just main event Jey, he was the heart of the faction. The one who cried when forced to betray his brother. The one who hesitated during Roman's harshest moments. The one who constantly asked questions when everyone else followed orders. And questions are dangerous in an empire built on obedience. Jey cracked first. He walked away, not in defeat, but in protest. A refusal to continue pretending that fear was loyalty. That blood justified pain. Jimmy stayed behind, but the fracture had begun. He didn't stay out of trust. He stayed out of fear. And fear, once exposed, turns into resentment. Then came Solo. The silent younger brother. Introduced as backup, but quickly becoming essential. He didn't speak. He didn't question. He executed. Until one day, fans began to notice, he didn't look at Roman when taking orders. He looked at Heyman. That was the shift. Paul Heyman had always been the whisperer. But now, he was the handler. And Solo? Solo wasn't following the tribal code, he was following instructions. Roman saw it. And instead of reacting, he pulled away. When Reigns disappeared, there was no farewell. No formal address. Just a void. And into that void stepped chaos. The bloodline wasn't built to run without its center. Without Roman, the entire hierarchy turned unstable. Jey went solo. Jimmy tried to lead, and failed. Solo filled the power vacuum, not officially, but visibly. And Heyman? He stood beside whoever held momentum. He always does. Publicly, he insisted Roman would return. Privately, he invested in the future, specifically, Rollins and Solo. That's where the fracture widened into a collapse. Heyman's silence during Roman's disappearance wasn't loyalty. It was preparation. And Solo? His loyalty wasn't to family. It was to control. He wasn't bound to Roman's vision. He was taught to follow strength. And when strength started to look like Seth Rollins, Heyman made his next move. He began to rewire the bloodline without its founder. Gone were the declarations of tribal leadership. Gone were the themes of legacy. In their place, more silence. More manipulation. And a slow, careful rewriting of history. Rollins was introduced as a new kind of power. Not family-based, but ideology-based. The Black Crown wasn't a counter to Roman's titles, it was a symbol of independence from him. Solo didn't need to say a word. His presence in segments with Rollins said enough. He wasn't just following orders. He was replacing allegiance. But it didn't work. Because the bloodline wasn't a product. It was personal. And personal stories don't die quietly. The fans never accepted Rollins as the heir to the throne. They enjoyed his chaos, cheered his arrogance, but they never worshipped him the way they did Reigns. Because Rollins didn't rule by principle, he ruled by default. And Punk? He saw the same flaw. That's why when Roman returned, the fans didn't cheer for him. They cheered because of him. He wasn't part of the bloodline anymore. He was coming for its pieces. To dismantle what Heyman had scrambled to hold together. Jimmy Uso, now adrift. Caught between the shadow of his brother and the burden of his choices. Jey, on Raw, thriving, but still scarred by the faction that nearly broke him. Solo, on the edge of full control, but slowly realizing that control doesn't equal loyalty. And Heyman? Trying to stitch together a second empire with stolen parts. But Reigns wasn't coming to rebuild. He was coming to end it. Not just the Bloodline name, but the illusion that it ever belonged to anyone else. It didn't matter who Heyman molded, or who wore the crown. Without Roman, there is no empire. And now that he's back, there will be no survivors. What happens in the ring is one story. What happens backstage is another. Roman Reigns' return and his shocking alliance, if you can call it that, with CM Punk didn't just shake the audience. It cracked the foundation behind the curtain. Locker rooms are built on unspoken rules, hierarchy, pecking order, respect. Reigns had been the top of that order for nearly 3 years. His absence created a vacuum. His return, without warning, without clearance from the usual chain of command, was like dropping a grenade into a closed meeting. The reactions weren't scripted. They were real. Some were stunned. Others? Pissed. Let's start with the obvious. Seth Rollins. He wasn't acting when he froze in that ring. Sources backstage say Rollins wasn't informed Roman would be part of the ending. The angle was tightly protected, shared only among a small circle. Not uncommon for major surprises, but rare when it involves names this big. Rollins, reportedly, was told Punk would go down decisively to set up a bigger narrative. What he wasn't told? That his Black Crown moment would be stolen by a ghost from the past. After the show, Rollins skipped press. No interviews. No social media post. Just silence. And when someone like Seth goes quiet, that's not for dramatic effect, it's calculated. Fury without release. The friction between Rollins and Punk has always been real. Now, with Roman standing beside Punk, the sense of betrayal cuts deeper. Not because it's part of a script. Because it resets the political order backstage. Reigns isn't just back. He's back on his terms. And no one, not even the reigning top guy, was prepared for that. The younger talent felt the tremor in a different way. For many, the Bloodline collapse was an opening. With Roman gone, opportunities bloomed. Jey Uso emerged as a breakout single star. LA Knight caught fire. Bronson Reed, Austin Theory, even Grayson Waller, all saw increased screen time. Roman coming back shifts focus again. And it's not just about airtime, it's about influence. Roman doesn't operate like other main eventers. He doesn't insert himself into someone else's feud. He becomes the feud. Any storyline he touches becomes the A-story. Everyone else gets pushed down a notch. Even champions. Backstage agents are already scrambling. One agent said, anonymously, "This changes everything. All the stories we thought we were building, now they orbit this new axis: Roman, Punk, Seth, Heyman. It's the nucleus now. Everyone else? Supporting roles. And that doesn't sit well with everyone. There's also concern about CM Punk's volatility. Not just his history with other promotions, but the very nature of his current status. He's not under a standard contract. His agreement gives him unique flexibility, creative influence, promotional reach, partial booking control. That creates tension. Some veterans view it as a double standard. They've spent years playing by the rules, Punk walks in and gets to rewrite them. Others see it differently. One top-tier star, speaking off the record, said, "Look, Punk coming back with Roman? That's genius. You don't have to like him. You just have to understand the business." That's box office. And anyone who's upset probably wanted that spot. It's a fair point. Not everyone is bitter. Some, particularly the mid-card talent, see opportunity. Feuds with Reigns or Punk, even short ones, elevate careers. A 5-minute segment with Roman is worth more than 5 matches with anyone else. But make no mistake, the tension is real. Paul Heyman, according to those present, remained stone-faced after the segment. He didn't speak to media. He didn't speak to talent. He left with minimal interaction, trailing solo Sikoa and avoiding eye contact with nearly everyone. That, in itself, said everything. For Heyman, this is more than storyline. This is a power struggle. For the first time in years, he's not the man behind the man. He's being chased by the men he built. Producers and writers are already reportedly reworking weeks of planned programming. The balance has shifted. Any plans to elevate newer stars are now being merged, or swallowed, by the new blood feud at the top of the card. The locker room, meanwhile, has split. Some back Rollins. They see him as the workhorse who held the company together during Roman's absence. A modern icon who took every bump, every interview, every airport photo, without complaint. Others back Punk and Roman. Not because they like them, but because they know what follows them: attention, money, main events. One producer put it bluntly, this isn't just a wrestling angle. This is political warfare disguised as entertainment. And that's where we are now. The match is over. The curtain has fallen. But behind it? The real drama is just beginning. Seth Rollins stood tall, until he didn't. For the past year, Rollins wasn't just a main event star. He was the guy. The lifeline WWE leaned on when Roman stepped away. The workhorse. The speaker. The brand ambassador in glitter and madness. While others took breaks or lost their heat, Rollins never stopped. He didn't just carry the torch, he turned it into a bonfire. And now? He's on the outside looking in. Because one night, just one, ripped apart everything he thought he'd built. Let's rewind. Rollins crafted a legacy built on adaptation. He was the Shield's architect. Then the corporate favorite. Then the Messiah. Then the Jester King. He morphed, evolved, survived. Every version was louder than the last, more flamboyant, more unpredictable. But underneath the feathers and laughter, one truth anchored every transformation: control. Rollins had finally built an empire of his own design. No Roman Reigns. No authority. No one standing above him. The black crown wasn't just a gimmick. It was a declaration: I don't need your belt to be your king. And the fans believed it. But that belief was fragile. Because deep down, everyone knew, there was one man Rollins never beat. One man whose absence made all of this possible. Roman Reigns. Rollins spent months attacking Roman's legacy indirectly. Not always by name, but through tone. The mocking promos. The sarcasm. The barely veiled jabs at undisputed champions who disappear. The implication was always there: Roman's gone, I'm here, and that makes me better. But implication isn't power. And when Roman returned, that power disappeared. Because Roman didn't come back to talk. He came back to humiliate. He didn't interrupt a match. He didn't cut a promo. He walked in, stood beside Punk, and watched Seth fall apart in real time. No punches needed. The visual was enough. For a man like Rollins, who built his kingdom on attention, being ignored is the ultimate insult. In that moment, everything crumbled. The black crown meant nothing. The spotlight shifted instantly. Rollins didn't just lose control. He lost relevance. And now, he's in a place he hasn't been in years, alone. His support system, Heyman, Solo, the invisible machine behind him. Fractured. His enemies? United. And the crowd? Conflicted. Some fans still chant his name. Others have moved on. Because WWE fans don't care how many shows you carried. They care what happens now. And right now, Seth isn't the top of the mountain. He's the cautionary tale. The question is, how does a man like Seth respond? He doesn't beg. He doesn't retreat. He fights. But this fight is different. Because for the first time, Seth isn't battling for gold or bragging rights. He's fighting to prove he still matters. That he's more than just the placeholder champion. That he's not the man who got to the top because Roman left, but in spite of him. There's a quiet desperation now. One that wasn't there before. His recent promos? A little sharper. Less playful. The grin more forced. The eyes colder. That's not just performance. That's panic, wrapped in purpose. He knows what's at stake. If Reigns and Punk dominate the narrative, Rollins risks becoming what he's always feared, a footnote in someone else's story. And Seth Rollins doesn't do footnotes. He does headlines. The locker room feels the shift too. Where once Seth was the axis, now he's a disruptor. Not a villain. Not a hero. Something else. A threat. Because a desperate Seth Rollins is the most dangerous version. He's unpredictable. Unhinged. The kind of man who'll burn the entire stage down if he's not invited to the main event. And make no mistake, he's not done. Roman may have stolen a moment. Punk may have earned an ally. But Seth Rollins still has what they don't, nothing left to lose. That's when a man is most lethal.